We begin with the Russian Revolution of 1917, an event that sent shockwaves around the world. The revolution released a burst of creative, political, and cultural activity that propelled modern art movements forward, including agitprop art. So what is agitprop? Agitprop's a combination of agitation and propaganda. Agitation, generally in its general use, mobilizing masses of people around a limited idea or event, like agitating to go on strike for higher wages, or agitating and marching against genocide. Propaganda, as we generally use it, educating around more complex ideas, explaining the falling rate of profit or the history of Zionism. With the triumph of the October Revolution, for the first time, workers were able to take and hold power. Agitprop artists went forth to decorate the streets and buildings for hundreds of festivals and demonstrations. As Mayakovsky put it, the streets, our brushes, the squares, our palettes. Along with traditional representational art, there were exciting new schools of art, like Cubofuturism and Suprematism. These movements would eventually be crushed by Stalinism, but the first years of the revolution saw an enormous amount of creative activities as workers and peasants celebrated their labor. Thousands of people participated in mass spectacles, pageants, and street theater. It was truly a festival of the oppressed. I give you this example. In 1922, in the port city of Baku in Azerbaijan, the 5th anniversary of the revolution was celebrated by performing the Symphony of Sirens. This spectacle began with mass bands and mass choirs singing the Internationale and other revolutionary anthems. The symphonic instruments were the foghorns of all the ships in the Caspian Sea flotilla, percussion from 2 batteries of artillery guns, infantry regiments, including a machine gun division, cannons, and hydroplanes. The hundreds of Baku factory sirens and whistles wailed away under the direction of a team of conductors standing atop specially built towers, working their flags, shooting handguns, and waving flaming torches. Can you imagine? Workers that were treated like beasts months before were suddenly an orchestra making music. It would be amazing today. But back to murals. Lots of stuff got painted. Along with decorations on the street, there were agitprop ships, carts, buses, you name it. Artists worked with the Russian State Telegraph Agency to create thousands of large, bright broadsheets called Rosa windows to aid campaigns like those for defense, production, women's rights, and literacy. Here's the painters at work. If you ever saw the movie Reds with Warren Beatty as John Reed, you see the agitprop trains streaming over the steps. Here, literature and roaster windows are being loaded onto these brightly painted agitprop trains. Well, of course, you have to imagine from these slides that they're brightly painted. There were trains painted to work as flipbook animation. Peasants could stand along the tracks and watch them move as the trains went by. In the train were cinema cars, where you could watch some of the most advanced films in the world by filmmakers like Dziga Vertov and Sergei Eisenstein. There were also cars with art galleries and classrooms. All of this gave access to culture for millions of people in the Soviet Union for the very first time. Perhaps its greatest symbol, Tatlin's Tower. It's often called Tatlin's Tower. Vladimir Tatlin's work is mostly ignored by art educators, except for its formal qualities, which were quite amazing. The real title is Monument to the Third Communist International. The founding of the Communist International in 1919 inspired some of the most visionary art of our epoch, including this piece. Designed to be a 130-story tower, it would be the tallest structure on Earth and would span the River Neva. Jitneys would carry you up the helix to go visit the top of the tower. Suspended in the tower were 4 revolving buildings. It's very hard to see them in the slides. At the base was a cube designed as a venue for conferences and meetings of the Communist International. It would rotate on its axis once a year. The next building up was a pyramid containing offices and completing a rotation once a month. The next one up was a cylinder housing an information center that would issue news bulletins and manifestos by telegraph and radio. It would rotate once a day. And at the top was a sphere with loudspeakers, giant message boards, and a projector to beam messages onto the clouds. The buildings were all to be made of glass so that you could always see what your leaders were doing. Of course, it was never built. People were cold and hungry, but workers proudly carried models on demonstrations. The tower was a weapon to educate about the goals proclaimed by the Communist International, to struggle by all available means, including armed force, for the overthrow of the international bourgeoisie and the creation of an international Soviet republic as a transition stage to the complete abolition of the state. It was a great victory, a great vision. Well, here in the US, we also have a tradition of agitprop, although it's largely hidden. Here we see the Patterson Silk Strike pageant of 1913. Striking mill workers, mostly women immigrant workers of many nationalities, marched from Paterson, New Jersey to Madison Square Garden and onto the stage, where in front of painted backdrops, they reenacted the strike and led the audience in singing their songs. The audience became one with the strikers. Above the building, electric lights spelled out the letters IWW for the industrial workers of the world. During the strike waves of the 1930s, where we organized industrial unions, it also generated a rich culture. During the Flint sit-down strike, for example, workers held classes and cultural events in the occupied buildings. But beyond the sit-down strikes, the cultural life of workers often revolved around the union, with newspapers, reading rooms, clubs, sports teams, dancing and music, even union radio stations. The IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, had a rich legacy of song, poetry, cartooning, and other agitprop art. All that great art came during revolutionary times. But this is where I enter. What can a working class artist do in a period of relative quiescence? Turns out, quite a bit. Here I'm painting about Joe Hill, one of our great labor martyrs. Okay, now I do a lot of spray work, but I'm not a graffiti artist. I use big spray guns, not those little cans that graffiti artists use. And here I want to digress a little bit to say a few words about modern graffiti. Spray can art began developing in the early 70s along with hip hop and breakdancing. It was an organic expression of working class rebellion, particularly in Black and Latino communities. Graffiti and street art grew to become the largest visual art movement in human history. Tens of thousands of mostly young artists emerge at night to express themselves, often in the face of repression. The gallery system of the art world, along with the authorities, hate and fear graffiti. Like with rock and roll, graffiti began as an outlaw art form. The ruling class has since worked very hard to co-opt and sanitize it, with some success. Today, there are thousands of city and state mural programs funded by banks and corporations to create toothless murals and co-opt graffiti art. Well, my own journey as an Agitprop muralist began as a union sign painter and pictorial artist painting billboards. My first efforts were Agitprop murals during trips to revolutionary Nicaragua before it was strangled by US imperialism. In Esteli, these young revolutionaries, some of them combatants in the war against the Contra-terrorists, came to me with a photo of Che, which I quickly painted onto their wall. Among his many accomplishments, Che had something to say about judging the success or failure of art and artists. I quote, "Those who play by the rules of the game are showered with honors, such honors as a monkey might get for performing pirouettes. The condition is that one does not try to escape from the invisible page." True of all academics, too. In 1986, I traveled to Austin, Minnesota in support of striking meat packers against the Hormel Meat Company to paint banners and then lead a group mural project on the union headquarters, a mural that became a symbol of the strike and the fight against concession contracts. Local P9 of the United Food and Commercial Workers went up against the company, the courts, the National Guard, but was betrayed by their own international officers that put the local into receivership, removed the local leadership, and sandblasted the mural off the wall. When no one in the town would do the sandblasting, the bureaucrats were forced to do it themselves. They began by blasting the faces off the workers and then the slogans off the banners. And that very tellingly reveals how some of these officials feel about their own members. Workers went to jail trying to stop them. The P9 strike and many others reveals a fundamental problem faced by US workers. We are burdened with a ponderous, gutless, ossified union bureaucracy. Today, about 10,000 union officials or staff in the United States bring home salaries greater than $100,000 a year and consume over $1 billion of their members' dues money. Many of these functionaries began as progressive-minded labor studies or law school graduates, but they never worked in the trades or industries that they claim to represent. Staff-driven unions control billions of dollars and often act in the interest of protecting their investments. The economic status of the officials tends to make them identify with the interests of the employers. That's why top officials in the unions refer to the middle class instead of the working class. Their conservatism is particularly reflected in their slavish loyalty to the Democratic and Republican parties. But workers are anxious to organize and fight the bosses. If any major union issued a call today, there would be a Labor Party in the US tomorrow, one that could fight for our class and even win elections. The bureaucratic obstacles we face has led us to organize Agitprop projects using a flanking maneuver. An injury to one is an injury to all is an example of how we've used cultural projects to outflank bureaucrats and advance class struggle ideas. After the Rodney King Rebellion, in the absence of a response from unions or civil rights groups, workers in Los Angeles rose in rebellion, destroying large swaths of the city. If we had a Labor Party, we could have mobilized people in the streets in a more effective political struggle. Now, If we had gone to the LA Federation of Labor and said, hey, we want to have a big rally to support the idea of a labor party and mobilizing workers against racism, it would never have happened. Instead, we organized a grassroots mural project, reaching out to involve union members as sponsors and building it up, eventually involving some celebrities. We painted the mural on a communication workers building. We held a rally to dedicate the mural to the victims of police violence. We used that event to agitate for a labor party, our original goal. We have followed that model of organization for other initiatives. Our emphasis has been projects that build international solidarity. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, we built coalitions both in the US and Northern Ireland. This was painted in the Ardoyne section of Belfast, one of the most violent areas of the city. I chose Malcolm X as a symbol because he was someone who was a militant Black nationalist, but also an advocate for internationalism. We painted it to promote the idea of unity of Catholic and Protestant workers to combat the employers that use narrow nationalism to divide the working class. I should note that while these projects always generate much press coverage, we are completely excluded from the art press and almost all progressive media, as Sarat mentioned. We are censored and canceled, made as invisible as those we paint for: agricultural, janitorial, healthcare, and other truly essential workers. I am probably the most censored artist in the world. I don't know of anyone more censored, let's put it that way. I'm so censored that I'm censored from books about censorship. This mural was created as part of a delegation challenging US sanctions against Iraq in 1998. Along with painting, we gave slideshows like this one at Baghdad University. This was a way to build an organic solidarity and oppose US sanctions that kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people, mostly children and the elderly, in places like Iraq and Nicaragua and other places that the US opposes. There's two other projects I want to talk about. The first was in the Ukraine. In 1996, on the 10th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster, I traveled into the death zone surrounding the V.I. Lenin nuclear power plant to paint a monument to the workers who gave their lives to shut down the plant. The project was sponsored by the ICEM, now called Industrial, and the Ukraine Atomic Workers Union. Industrial is the International Confederation of Energy Workers of many different countries. We were promoting the idea of retraining nuclear workers to be decommissioning workers, thus guaranteeing jobs while eliminating this insane menace to the world. The city officials of Slivutich, which is where the workers had been relocated after the disaster, refused to give us a wall. While we were waging a campaign for a wall, we painted this portable piece and presented it to the 7,000 workers, called liquidators, that were still cleaning up a decade after the disaster. Many of them have since perished, along with thousands of others. The liquidators were mostly Ukrainian. The higher paid plant operators were mostly Russian. Finally, in the face of the authorities' intransigence, the workers went to a cement factory. They constructed two large walls. In an inspiring act of defiance, they brought heavy equipment to the center of the city and installed the walls. Women masons and volunteers prepped the walls for painting. Despite threats from the government, we were able to complete the murals. From the ashes of the old, we will build a new world. Those words are from the song Solidarity Forever. These last shots were taken not too long ago from a video I was sent by a friend there as Russian troops were attacking Slivutich. Reportedly, the workers are heading off to defend the murals. He wanted to send that to me. The Salvador murals remain one of the few murals that has not been destroyed, at least just so far as I know. From Ukraine, we go to Israel and the occupied territories, where the apartheid state of Israel is attempting to impose a final solution on the Palestinian people. Bread Roses Hondola was painted in the Beit Jibrin refugee camp. These children are called human animals, snakes, and worse, by Zionist politicians. The rule of this monstrous state must be ended. I painted 3 murals on that trip. No Walls Between Workers was painted with Palestinian construction workers with help from Israeli and Palestinian artists. On the Red Square website, you can find a link to a terrific film that reveals how these workers respond and are transformed by the mural project. It's called Breaking Walls. I encourage you to watch it. You will be amazed and inspired. And finally, Monument to Rachel Corrie, painted in the village of Anata for the Rachel Corrie Peace Center. The building has since been demolished by the Israeli Defense Forces. Rachel Corrie, a brave and caring activist against housing demolitions, was murdered by the IDF. She has now been joined by comrade Eisenor Agi, I hope I'm not massacring that too badly, who was assassinated by cowardly Israeli thugs. They and the tens of thousands of Palestinian martyrs, along with the millions that have gone into the streets to oppose the genocide, have opened the eyes and the hearts of the world to the Palestinian struggle. We go now to Mexico City. This is one of a 2-part cross-border project between Mexico and the U.S., sponsored by the UE, the United Electrical Workers Union, and the Frente Auténtico Trabajadores in Mexico. This was the first one painted in Mexico City in the Auditorium of 5. When I got there, at the request of the Mexican workers, I painted the figures of Lucy and Albert Parsons, leaders of the fight for the 8-hour day in Chicago. Albert Parsons was one of the 8 anarchist labor leaders framed up and executed following the Haymarket events of May 4th, 1886. May 1st, May Day, International Workers' Day, began as a commemoration of those events. The whole world celebrates the militancy of the North American labor movement. The second mural was painted to celebrate the victory of the UPS strike in 1998 at Teamster City in Chicago. At a spirited rally of several hundred strikers of Local 705, the largest and most militant UPS local in the country, just blocks from Haymarket, I asked if anyone knew who Albert and Lucy Parsons were. No one did. We have been robbed of our history, and we need to relearn it. The U.S. labor movement has a proud and militant history of struggle, but that history has been suppressed. We need to relearn our history, our traditions, and our symbols. We want bread and roses too, demanded female textile strikers in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912. We need a singing, dancing, and performing labor movement. And most importantly, we need to reestablish the principle of being politically independent from the bosses. This is an updated sabotabi, wobbly symbol of sabotage, with an emphasis on withholding our labor power on the job. The slogan is from the May-June events in France in 1968. This is an update of the Wobbly's Pyramid of Capitalism. From the bottom, it reads, labor produces all wealth. We feed you, we mislead you, we bleed you, we boot you or shoot you, we fool you, we rule you. Capitalism sucks. This is from a trip to Trinidad and work with the oil workers union there. A banner honoring the great Trinidadian Marxist CLR James. By the way, to get more information on all the symbols in these murals and banners and everything, go to Red Square, where there's text that explains some of this stuff. I know a lot of people don't know these symbols. Probably people here are better informed than others, but by painting them, people ask, and then you get to explain. And so these are very pedagogical. The quote from CLR reads, "The working class will begin to move, like some earthquake, some tempest, some tremendous resistance to the existing system that will project the working class to the head of society. Labor solidarity has no borders." Mural in South Central LA. "The ruling class wants us to think they are invincible and we are powerless." And it can seem that way at times. But in truth, the working class today has more potential power than at any time in history. Look behind Marx, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and Malcolm X. It's a reference to my old union, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way. A lining bar or a spiking hammer are ancient and rudimentary tools, yet in the right hands, they can bring most US production to a halt. Today, with the rationalization of labor, unions could wield enormous power. Even a small union of communication, transportation, or energy workers could bring the employers to their knees. The problem is we're not utilizing that power. As Steve Biko said, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Those mental chains are the most powerful weapon that the capitalists have, more powerful than all their armies and advanced technology. Today, unlike in 1970, we certainly don't have to arm the workers. We just have to free our minds. And that brings me to the US elections, the world's largest scripted reality show. The ruling class is masterful at creating and choreographing competition and divisions among us. After all, that's what we artists are paid to do. My union, the United Scenic Artists of Yahtzee, create the lighting, sound, production, the makeup artists, the costumers, and all the other stuff that helps to convince you about the invincibility of the ruling class and the importance of their elections. So they put up a repulsive racist candidate like Donald Trump. He gets exposed in a debate, and unfortunately, my progressive friends are so delighted. He spews this stuff about millions of insane criminals coming across our borders to eat our pets, and we laugh. But Kamala Harris does not refute any of this. She said nothing about it. Mostly, she proclaimed her willingness to continue the genocide against the Palestinian people. Defending immigrant workers must be at the heart of what socialists do today. We have to dispel the myths of American exceptionalism. We are not Americans. We are workers. We are no different than our Haitian or Mexican brothers and sisters. The only time we're Americans is when we're sent out to slaughter our fellow workers or to pay taxes. We do not get to decide who the President of the United States is or any other elected official. We are presented with pre-vetted flunkies selected by our overlords. We get to pick one or the other. This is who gets to decide who runs the country, the ruling capitalist class. They decide who runs the government, the purpose of which is to facilitate greater profits, to feed their unquenchable greed. Decisions about elections are made in corporate boardrooms and think tanks, at the Pentagon, at exclusive country clubs, or on yachts. Then the politicians are given instructions about what to do. Certainly, you saw how quickly they chucked the primary votes and threw Biden under the bus when the world saw that he was basically a cadaver. Voila, Kamala Harris was anointed. This doesn't mean that we should not defend voting rights, which are under attack. We should. And we should run for office, but not to have a place at the table, but to overturn the table and destroy the two parties' global death machine. Exactly what Eugene Debs did and paid the price for it. Christianity is not the religion of the United States. Electoralism is. We are indoctrinated from birth that we are special and we have the right to vote. Electoralism is a faith-based belief that you can change your social conditions by casting a vote. But real change happens when millions of people mobilize in the streets or exercise their power at the workplace. Our greatest challenge as Marxists is to expose the fraud of elections. Malcolm X was very clear about this. He said, "I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I don't even consider myself an American. I'm speaking as a victim of this American system. I see America through the eyes of the victim. I don't see an American dream. I see an American nightmare. They have got a game going on, a political con game, and you and I are in the middle. It's time we wake up and start looking at it like it is, and then we can deal with it like it is." So I will now begin to end. I began with red lightning. Well, we need red lightning today. We need lightning bolts of art that reveal the nature of the system and inspires people to action. We need lightning bolts of theory that helps us to understand the nature of imperialism and how it functions. We need lightning bolts of political action to organize, educate, and agitate for the overturn of capitalism, if we want to survive as a species. We need to put Marx on the wall and into our heads. The days are over when humanity can accept tepid reforms. We can no longer soft pedal things. As Marx put it, communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can only be attained by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Well, most of my work has been censored or destroyed, sandblasted, painted over, reduced to rubble, or disappeared. But when the city at the crossroads of history was censored by the Museum of the City of New York and the Puffin Foundation, it was Rethinking Marxism that provided a space for it. And I wanted to thank you for that, Sarap, and all of you for that today. Marxists may be scattered in small groups, but that doesn't make us unimportant. There will be social explosions, and when that happens, the ideas that we grapple with today will be taken up by countless others. We cannot meekly accept nuclear annihilation or carbon-based species suicide. We have the potential to create a world based on human solidarity. It can only happen through an epic struggle. For that, we must forge weapons that wage that struggle, including agitprop art, militant unions, revolutionary parties, and organizations. This concludes my rant. I told you what I think. Now we can hear what you think.